Donkey Kong Bananza is exactly what you'd want from a Nintendo console's launch window title. It doesn't copy its predecessors, nor does it rest on its laurels, like for example New Super Mario Bros. During the launch of the Wii U to pretty much no one's excitement. DK Bananza takes a familiar character to push a new concept that's made specifically for new hardware. But at the same time, as someone who has been following this company's output for decades, Donkey Kong Bananza also feels like one of the most perplexing games I've ever played from Nintendo. Clearly the game was a crowd pleaser and was well received across the board, and it's easy to see why. Because they borrowed proven ideas from across the industry where Nintendo usually doesn't go, both in gameplay and overall presentation. However, some of these crowd-pleasing aspects to me create a somewhat weird and messy picture. Irritation can be good, certainly better than playing something painfully safe, but different doesn't automatically mean better. The game got lots of praise, which probably doesn't need more repeating, so here are a few different takes. Again, if nothing else, DK Bananza doesn't just repeat what worked with Mario Odyssey during the Switch launch year, for example, despite coming from the same team. There are similarities in game feel, but focus is entirely different. Terraforming isn't really new in games, it goes back at least to the Red Faction series in the early 2000s, but this kind of destruction is certainly new to Nintendo platformers. And indeed, from the very first moment, it is relatively flashy to be able to beat and smash your way through almost the entire map to reach your goals. Though I'd drop comparisons to Red Faction, and not just because of the obvious genre difference. We all know those fake mobile gaming ads which targets that gratification system in your head by smashing big walls in a single sweep or exponentially mowing down hordes of cannon fodder. Well, Donkey Kong Bananza made a full game out of that. The maps you wander are akin to piñatas. Anywhere you punch, the ground literally spurts out gold and treasure. It's a constant cycle of instant gratification. Super Mario Odyssey was already a little guilty of this. It abandoned the structure of finding power stars at the end of a specific obstacle course, but instead hid countless of these moon collectibles all over the map, which resulted in more frequent, smaller rewards, grabbing your attention much quicker. And this wasn't new for platformers. After Crash Bandicoot felt a little too bland in early playtests, they gave him his trademark boxes to smash, so you'd feel more engaged in between the platforming. However, and here's a hot take I guess, compared to that, Donkey Kong Bananza doesn't really have the most interesting platforming design to fill out the moments between smashing things. It's ironic, the game certainly has a much more complex moveset than usual in Nintendo platformers. Besides the rolling maneuver from the 2D games and the ability to climb surfaces without a stamina limitation, Donkey Kong can now punch in multiple directions with different buttons, activate a sonar blast or rip chunks out of the ground to either use them as surfboards or ammunition. Then there's a total of 5 unlockable abilities which enhance the moveset with things like flying and double jumps. And unlike others, I found the camera controls very natural, never losing sight of where I was while digging. However, the goals, especially during the first half of the game, are more linear than the sandboxes in Mario Odyssey. That isn't bad per se, but this also gives you little reason to really strategize or experiment to reach the top of a mountain or whatever. Following the main trail and punching a few things for a few dopamine shots usually does the trick. I won't pretend that it isn't entertaining, I certainly felt engaged anytime I booted up the game and started smashing things again. After all, Nintendo here provides the full dopamine rush. Particles fly all over the screen, there are short freeze frames when enemies crash through walls, gold makes satisfying rustling noises, and the controller rumbles for a constant hefty attack feedback. Once you get abilities like the elephant trunk, I again couldn't help but think about those mobile gaming ads. Still, I won't deny that there's a certain art to creating this sort of dopamine-fueled spectacle and instant gratification. I can enjoy my time with the likes of Dynasty Warriors or Vampire Survivors, no doubt, but just like those games, the constant gratification also starts to wear thin after a while. That's a stark contrast to prior games. Donkey Kong Country was one of the last remaining Nintendo platforming series made for people that have experience with the genre and which didn't pull any punches when it came to difficulty. He also had other Donkey Kong games like the 94 Game Boy iteration, which came with dozens of tightly designed action puzzle courses. Compared to that, as a platformer, the destruction focus of Bananza feels kinda hollow. Especially because the game doesn't really challenge you for a long period of its playtime. Not to mention that the destruction has clear boundaries. Objects merely explode into pieces rather than reacting, they can't fall over and cause more havoc, for example. It's very reliant on the instant gratification from seeing all those goodies explode all over the screen constantly. Admittedly, in the last third, or maybe even during the entire second half, the game does get more challenging, especially for a family-friendly title. During the later biomes, once you have all your abilities, it gets more tricky to traverse. Later, the economy also improves noticeably, giving the game's Gold Rush actual meaning. You often have to pay for level barriers, and healing items are expensive too. This actually weighs in the last third of the game, because as already said, it can get tricky down the line, with some hard enemy hits and hectic boss patterns. However, it feels a little too late for a challenge to occur, since at that point you're already 6 to 8 hours in, and whenever it focuses on the platforming, it also really doesn't keep up with pure parkour games such as Mario or side-scrolling Donkey Kong, which becomes especially blatant during some of these short nostalgia throwbacks, mimicking levels of DK Country without any of its tight level design. The side-scrolling in particular, and some other throwbacks like the minecarts, feel pretty unremarkable. It still always needs to revolve around environmental destruction or digging, so it never feels truly like a satisfying platformer. But even if I just took it for what it is, a big boulder smashing game which takes half of its playtime to really evolve, there's still one thing that irks me as a Donkey Kong fan, which is a blatant lack of style. The original arcade cabinet has some of the most iconic gaming images of all time, and later British developer Rare would reinvent the character with a more jazzy tone, but also go for a more moody presentation in Donkey Kong Country. Now, I'm sure many fans are in awe of yet another game with these typical Nintendo vistas in Bananza, but I have to be blunt, to me personally this is not a very good looking game at all. I assume it's due to the nature of the destructible environment, but none of these biomes feel nearly as vivid and unique as the sandboxes in Super Mario Odyssey, which came from the same team. These landscapes made of low poly debris and mud make for pretty bland visuals in my opinion. And often there's this garish filter over some of these muted colors. It gets a little more creative in the latter half when the level design in general becomes more complex, but those are the exceptions that prove the rule. And I just can't care for these generic rock NPCs. Though I guess I like these dandy zebras. And the new Donkey Kong animations are good too. Anyway, considering its radical shift in tone, the blatant fan service and throwbacks feel very out of place, but more on that in a minute. Equally disappointing is the soundtrack. For a new game in a franchise with legendary music, especially the more low-key and atmospheric songs of the DK Country series by the old Rareware composers, and for a game featuring singing as a central story theme, in Bananza there are no songs that really stick out, except for the nostalgic throwbacks, because the remixed songs of old are by far the best songs in the entire game. And it's not because the new music doesn't have the same style as Donkey Kong Country. The more fairy tale-esque sound of DK64, which came back for the Donkey Kong DLC in Mario + Rabbids, was pretty different too. However, while the songs in Bananza aren't painful to listen to or anything, they lack any distinct style and might as well come from a generic Kirby game. Yet there's one thing that separates this Donkey Kong not only from past games in the franchise, but also many other Nintendo mascot games. And I guess I'll have to go into spoiler territory now, because that new thing is that there's never been a mascot platformer from Nintendo with this much story. It's like a Sony PS2 platformer now, even including tropes from some PS3 Sony inspired games, namely the child side character, which is of course supposed to pull on your heartstrings by babbling with you during level transitions and other moments, and you even get your cliche moment of the duo being separated. I can only imagine that they snuck this game past franchise inventor Shigeru Miyamoto, considering his stance on cutscenes and storytelling in games, which is so rigid that he scolded the team of Mario Galaxy for contextualizing the character of Rosalina with a few very short optional cutscenes. I always opposed that opinion, because there was that decade of Mario games stripped down to the bare minimum, which all felt like unremarkable map packs, because there wasn't a single unique character or backdrop in them. When Super Mario Wonder came out and actually came up with new worlds and gave some levels minor plot tidbits, that alone was already enough to strongly alter the game feel compared to yet another new Super Mario Bros. Map pack. The Mario RPG series suffered in quality when Miyamoto had unique stories and characters removed. It took out the element of surprise that should be essential to RPGs and adventure games. And DK Bananza is another example of that. The backdrop of chasing the villains through multiple biomes towards the Earth core gives those stages a different spin than any other Mario game. And as you head towards the finale, it gets a little more mysterious and you never quite know what's going to happen next, which is good. On the other hand, Bananza makes me understand Miyamoto's stance a bit more. The game uses tropes from animated movies, which is fine for the audience, but frankly I don't really feel that this kind of Sony mascot approach fits Nintendo characters, which were never designed with movie dramaturgy in mind. You've got your typical Disney trope of following your dreams, now applied to the dream of eating all the bananas. Again, that on its own is whatever, yet the game then gets so dramatic at times that frankly this is the weirdest I've felt about a Nintendo title since the ridiculous melodrama of Metroid Other M. Especially during the ending. During the final hours the game gets so serious and edgy, it feels like a total misfit. Maybe newcomers who haven't played the originals perceive this way differently than me. While I praised the moody presentation of Donkey Kong Country, I wasn't ever that huge on the crocodile enemies, which I felt were, let's say, a product of their time, but also from the little characterization they got, they were like goofy Scooby-Doo villains. And their names were puns. Bananza, in a weird attempt to take fan service and the Donkey Kong lore way too seriously, turns the main villain, King K. Rool, into this sort of original evil out to destroy humanity in a dramatic way, apparently rotten to the core. It's all played so straight and unironically, like, are we still playing a Donkey Kong game here? I was very much reminded of Sonic shifting from quirky little hedgehog fighting a cartoon scientist to an edgy kaiju fighter facing apocalyptic events and existential dilemmas. While I do like my Sonic games, there's a reason many have been memed to hell, and I don't find this kind of angst appealing for Donkey Kong. I don't know, this entire game is such a stylistically confused irritation to me. I don't really care for the new art direction to begin with, yet they try to shoehorn in all these fanservice-y throwbacks, which only make it more uneven, while also probably not understanding what the games they're referencing were going for. The gameplay might be a perfect fit for short bursts of getting your dopamine up, smashing things blindly for instant gratification in its perfection, but overall that makes for a much less tight game than your Donkey Kong 94 or Tropical Freeze. And because they all have these throwbacks in there, it's hard to not compare these titles, even though they seem different. Overall, I would have preferred this entire thing as a new IP. Then I would have probably seen it in an entirely different light.